The dead don't come back, unless someone worked very hard to bury the truth. The grand ballroom of Sterling Manor shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, every polished surface reflecting generations of wealth, influence, and carefully protected appearances. Members of the Sterling family, board directors, politicians, and business partners dressed in tailored black gathered beneath an enormous oil portrait of Ethan Brooks, the young Omega whose smiling face had been immortalized 7 years earlier after the world accepted that he had disappeared forever. Adrian Sterling stood alone near the front of the room, taller than nearly everyone around him, his tailored charcoal suit immaculate despite the exhaustion hidden behind his steel-gray eyes. Time had transformed him into one of the youngest CEOs in the country, respected, admired, and feared, yet every anniversary felt exactly the same. The silence beneath the speeches always reminded him of the questions no investigation had ever answered. The master of ceremonies adjusted the microphone and spoke warmly about legacy, sacrifice, and remembrance while guests politely applauded. Outside, rain tapped softly against the towering windows, wrapping the estate in a quiet melancholy that seemed fitting for a memorial dedicated to someone who had become more legend than memory. Adrian barely listened. He had memorized every speech years ago. Every carefully chosen sentence avoided the one thing nobody dared mention: guilt. As another executive stepped forward to praise the Sterling family's resilience, the massive oak doors at the back of the ballroom slowly opened. The sound was almost lost beneath the applause, yet something instinctive pulled Adrian's attention toward the entrance. A man stepped inside wearing a dark overcoat, still carrying tiny drops of rain across the shoulders. His posture was calm, his expression unreadable. His blonde hair was slightly longer than current fashion, and a pair of thin glasses softened features that somehow felt both unfamiliar and impossible to ignore. The room noticed him one curious glance at a time. No invitation had been announced. No name had appeared on the guest list. Conversations faded into uncertain whispers as security hesitated, confused by the stranger's quiet confidence. He didn't hurry. He didn't look intimidated by the wealth surrounding him. Instead, he walked slowly toward the portrait hanging above the marble fireplace and studied it with an emotion so subtle that no one could immediately identify it. Adrian's heartbeat became strangely uneven. It wasn't recognition. It couldn't be. The face before him belonged to someone else entirely. Different hairstyle. Different clothing. Older. Stronger. Yet something beneath those changes stirred a forgotten instinct deep inside him, an echo impossible to explain. For one brief second, the stranger lifted his eyes toward Adrian. Their gazes met across the crowded ballroom. Adrian felt an inexplicable familiarity settle over him, like hearing the opening notes of a song he hadn't remembered in years. Before anyone could speak, the stranger offered a calm, almost polite smile. "I apologize for arriving unannounced," he said, his steady voice carrying effortlessly through the silent room. "I was told this family still values the truth." The words landed with unsettling weight. Several board members exchanged nervous looks. An elderly director frowned. Adrian took one slow step forward without realizing he had moved at all. The stranger reached into the inside pocket of his coat, not with urgency but with deliberate composure, and placed a sealed envelope on the memorial table beneath Ethan's portrait. "Please consider this my first gift," he said quietly. "I believe it belongs to the Sterling family." Without waiting for permission, he turned toward the exit. The room remained frozen until the front doors closed behind him. Only then did Adrian notice something impossible lingering in the air, not a memory he could explain, but a feeling that refused to disappear. Somewhere beyond the rain, the stranger had already vanished, leaving behind a single envelope capable of changing everything the Sterling family believed about the man they had spent 7 years mourning. Adrian remained motionless long after the stranger disappeared into the rain, his attention fixed on the sealed envelope resting beneath Ethan Brooks's portrait as though it had been placed there by fate itself rather than an ordinary man. The guests who had filled the ballroom with polite conversation only moments earlier now exchanged cautious whispers, each person attempting to identify the mysterious visitor before anyone else could speak first. Some insisted he had to be an attorney representing an unknown client. Others believed he was a journalist searching for attention. A few quietly wondered whether the entire interruption had been carefully staged to embarrass the Sterling family in front of investors. Adrian ignored every theory. None of them explained the strange certainty growing in the back of his mind. He finally stepped toward the memorial table and picked up the envelope. It was surprisingly ordinary, made from thick cream-colored paper without a company logo or return address. Only 3 words were written across the front in elegant handwriting. For Adrian alone. His pulse quickened despite himself. He recognized neither the ink nor the handwriting, yet something about the careful lettering stirred a memory that remained just beyond reach. The chairman of the board approached cautiously and suggested opening the envelope in private, but Adrian had already broken the seal. Inside rested a single photograph and 1 folded sheet of paper. The photograph immediately captured every eye nearby. It showed the old lighthouse overlooking Grey Harbor, a place nearly 100 miles from Sterling Manor, taken only days earlier according to the timestamp hidden in one corner. Standing near the railing was the same stranger who had interrupted the memorial. Beside him stood a young boy no older than 6, smiling while holding a paper sailboat against the ocean breeze. The child's face was partially turned away from the camera, making it impossible to identify him completely, yet something about his profile felt oddly familiar. Adrian unfolded the letter with steady hands. There were only 2 sentences. You buried the wrong story. If you truly want answers, stop protecting people who never deserved your loyalty. No signature followed. No explanation appeared. Beneath the message, Adrian read the words again and again until every syllable echoed inside his thoughts. Across the ballroom, several directors quietly resumed discussing business, eager to dismiss the interruption as an unfortunate distraction, but Adrian noticed something they did not. One elderly family advisor had suddenly lost all color from his face after catching a glimpse of the photograph. Before Adrian could question him, the man excused himself and hurried out of the ballroom with unusual urgency. Adrian watched him disappear around the corner, another unanswered question joining the growing collection that had haunted him for 7 years. Meanwhile, nearly 100 miles away, the stranger stood on a quiet wooden pier as evening settled across Grey Harbor. The young boy beside him carefully released the paper sailboat onto the gentle waves, laughing as it drifted farther from shore. The stranger smiled with genuine warmth, a side of him no one inside Sterling Manor had witnessed. The boy looked up with bright blue eyes and asked, "Are they finally ready to know the truth?" The man gazed toward the distant horizon where the last light of sunset touched the water and answered with calm certainty, "Not yet. First, they need to remember everything they chose to forget." 7 years earlier, long before silence settled over Sterling Manor like permanent winter, Adrian Sterling had believed the future could actually be simple. On quiet Sunday mornings, he would leave the city behind and drive nearly 40 miles to Grey Harbor, where Ethan Brooks managed a small bookstore overlooking the marina. Ethan always claimed the ocean made every difficult decision feel smaller, and Adrian secretly believed him because every visit somehow made the pressure of carrying the Sterling name disappear. They spent hours walking along the wooden pier with coffee growing cold in their hands while talking about ordinary dreams instead of billion-dollar acquisitions. Ethan wanted a house with a wide front porch, shelves filled with books, and enough space for children to run through the backyard. Adrian laughed every time Ethan described the imaginary home in perfect detail, promising that one day he would build exactly that place. For the first time in his life, Adrian imagined a future measured by family instead of quarterly reports. Even after returning to the city, the memory of Ethan's gentle smile stayed with him longer than any board meeting or financial victory. Their bond grew stronger month after month despite the quiet disapproval surrounding them. The Sterling family believed relationships should strengthen corporate alliances, not follow the heart. Ethan never argued with them. Instead, he remained patient, encouraging Adrian to believe that understanding would eventually replace judgment. Then everything began changing so gradually that neither of them recognized the danger until it was already woven into every conversation. Anonymous messages started arriving at Sterling headquarters, questioning Ethan's loyalty. Small misunderstandings became larger rumors. Meetings Adrian thought had been cancelled somehow continued without him. Important conversations always seemed to happen while he was somewhere else. Trusted advisors quietly suggested that Ethan was hiding important information. Adrian refused to believe them at first, but doubt has a way of growing when it is repeated often enough. Every explanation Ethan offered sounded sincere, yet every new accusation arrived with documents, photographs, or carefully selected witnesses that appeared impossible to dismiss. Ethan noticed the distance forming between them long before Adrian admitted it even existed. One evening, standing beside the lighthouse as the sun disappeared beyond the Atlantic, Ethan gently reached for Adrian's hand and asked only one question. "When everyone else tells you one story and I tell you another, will you still remember who I have always been?" Adrian answered without hesitation that he would always trust Ethan, and for a little while, they both believed those words would be enough. Neither of them realized someone else had been listening from a parked car across the road, watching every moment with quiet satisfaction. Back in the present, Adrian remained alone inside his office, unable to stop staring at the photograph from the mysterious envelope. His eyes drifted from the unknown child to the distant lighthouse in the background. Suddenly, the memory returned with perfect clarity. The exact angle of the railing. The weathered bench overlooking the water. The same place where Ethan had asked him to choose trust over fear. Adrian slowly lowered the photograph as another unsettling thought entered his mind. If the stranger knew about that lighthouse, then he knew details that had never appeared in any newspaper, police report, or family record. Those memories belonged to only two people. One of them had supposedly disappeared forever. The other was no longer certain that the impossible remained impossible. The following afternoon, Adrian cancelled every meeting on his schedule for the first time in years and drove alone to Grey Harbor without informing anyone from the Sterling family. The road felt strangely familiar, every mile carrying him deeper into memories he had spent 7 years trying to silence. By the time he reached the old lighthouse, heavy clouds had drifted across the sky, leaving the Atlantic covered in soft gray light. The wooden pier remained almost unchanged except for fresh paint on the railings and a new coffee stand near the entrance. Families wandered along the waterfront, children chased seagulls, and tourists filled the sidewalks, making it impossible to believe this quiet place had become the center of every unanswered question in Adrian's life. He unfolded the photograph once again, comparing every detail with the scene before him. The angle matched perfectly. Whoever had taken the picture knew this place well. Adrian slowly walked toward the bookstore Ethan had once managed, only to discover a different business occupying the building. A friendly woman arranging flowers outside smiled politely when he asked about the previous owner. She explained that the bookstore had closed years earlier after everyone believed its young owner had disappeared. Most people eventually moved on, she said, but a few locals still remembered how kind Ethan had been to every child who wandered inside looking for adventure stories. Before Adrian could ask another question, laughter echoed from the nearby park. His attention shifted almost instinctively toward the sound. A young boy with bright blue eyes was carefully helping an elderly man retrieve a colorful kite tangled beneath a wooden bench. The child could not have been older than 6. His blonde hair moved gently in the ocean breeze, and his calm patience seemed unusual for someone his age. Adrian watched from a distance without understanding why he suddenly found it difficult to look away. When the kite finally lifted into the air again, the boy smiled with quiet satisfaction instead of excitement, as though making someone else happy mattered more than receiving praise himself. The elderly man thanked him warmly before walking away. The child remained standing alone for a moment, looking toward the harbor with thoughtful eyes that reminded Adrian of someone he had once known. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts before he could move any closer. "You have always had terrible timing." Adrian turned immediately. The same mysterious stranger stood several yards away holding 2 paper cups of coffee as though their meeting had been planned all along. His expression remained composed, but there was unmistakable confidence in the way he met Adrian's gaze. "Who are you?" Adrian asked quietly. The stranger glanced toward the little boy, who was now happily watching sailboats drift across the water, before answering with another question. Does a name really matter if you still refuse to recognize the truth standing in front of you? Adrian studied every feature of the man's face, searching for certainty where only impossible familiarity existed. The stranger handed him 1 cup of coffee. You still drink it without sugar, he observed. Adrian accepted the cup almost automatically, then froze. Very few people knew that habit because he had changed it years earlier after Ethan disappeared. Before Adrian could demand another explanation, the little boy ran over carrying the colorful kite string with an innocent smile. He looked first at the stranger, and then at Adrian with open curiosity. Are you the friend you told me about? The child asked. The stranger smiled gently before answering. Not yet. Adrian felt another quiet shock settle into his chest. The boy's smile, the kindness in his eyes, and the calm confidence in the stranger's voice all seemed connected by a story he had not yet earned the right to hear. The little boy held the kite string with both hands while the ocean breeze carried the bright fabric high above the harbor, completely unaware that his simple question had left Adrian struggling to understand emotions he could no longer control. The stranger rested one hand lightly on the child's shoulder before gently encouraging him to continue flying the kite along the open grass near the lighthouse. The boy nodded happily and ran toward the shoreline, laughing as the colorful shape danced against the gray afternoon sky. Adrian watched him for several silent seconds before turning back toward the man standing beside him. You know things that nobody else knows, Adrian said carefully. The lighthouse. My coffee. The memorial. If you want answers, stop speaking in riddles. The stranger looked out across the Atlantic instead of answering immediately. Do you remember what Ethan wanted more than anything? He finally asked. Adrian frowned. He wanted peace. The stranger slowly shook his head. No. Peace was only what he wished for after losing hope. Before that, he wanted a family that would never have to earn the right to belong. Those words struck Adrian harder than he expected because he remembered hearing something almost identical years ago during one of their walks along this very pier. He had never repeated that conversation to anyone. Before Adrian could respond, the little boy returned carrying a small seashell in the palm of his hand. Look what I found, he said proudly. It has a little star inside. The stranger crouched beside him with patient warmth. That means the ocean wanted you to keep it. The child smiled, slipped the shell into his jacket pocket, and then looked curiously at Adrian. Do you like the ocean too? Adrian managed a small smile. I used to. The boy tilted his head as though considering the answer very seriously. Maybe you will again. His innocent words lingered in the air long after. He wandered a few steps away to collect smooth stones near the water. Adrian noticed how naturally the stranger watched over the child, never controlling him, only quietly making certain he remained safe. There was trust between them that could not be created overnight. Who is he? Adrian finally asked. The stranger's expression softened. His name is Noah. Is he your son? The question escaped before Adrian could stop himself. The stranger did not answer directly. Instead, he looked toward Noah with unmistakable affection. He is the reason I came back. Adrian felt another wave of impossible familiarity. Noah laughed as he carefully skipped a flat stone across the calm water. The motion was awkward but determined, and Adrian suddenly remembered teaching Ethan the exact same trick during one summer afternoon years earlier. Even the way Noah leaned slightly forward before releasing the stone mirrored that forgotten memory. Adrian stared in disbelief, unable to explain why every small detail seemed connected to a past he had buried. At that same moment, across town, a black luxury sedan rolled quietly into the parking lot overlooking the harbor. Inside, the elderly Sterling advisor who had fled the memorial the previous day lowered a pair of binoculars with trembling hands after spotting Adrian speaking with the mysterious stranger. He immediately reached for his phone and placed a hurried call. He found them, he whispered. If he learns who the boy really is, everything we protected for 7 years will collapse. The call ended almost as quickly as it had begun, but its warning had already begun traveling through the hidden corners of the Sterling family. Far from the harbor, confidential messages reached private offices, trusted advisors quietly cancelled appointments, and several people who had spent years believing the past would remain buried suddenly realized that the future was becoming impossible to control. None of them knew exactly what the mysterious stranger planned to do next. They only knew one thing with absolute certainty. Noah could never be allowed to stand in front of the Sterling board. Back at Grey Harbor, the afternoon slowly faded. Toward evening, as the breeze carried the scent of salt water across the pier, Noah happily walked ahead, carefully balancing across the wide wooden planks while counting each step aloud. Adrian followed several feet behind without realizing he had begun matching the child's pace. Every time Noah stumbled slightly, Adrian instinctively reached forward before remembering that the boy was not his responsibility. The stranger noticed the unconscious reaction but said nothing. Instead, he quietly observed Adrian with the calm patience of someone waiting for another person to discover the truth without being forced toward it. Noah suddenly stopped beside an old ice cream stand. He studied the menu for several seconds before turning toward the stranger. "Can we share one?" he asked with a hopeful smile. The stranger nodded. "Only if you choose the flavor." Noah laughed and pointed immediately. "Vanilla." Adrian felt his thoughts freeze once again. Ethan had always chosen vanilla, insisting that simple things stayed meaningful because they never pretended to be something else. Adrian remembered teasing him about ordering the same flavor every summer, only to end up sharing it anyway. It had become their quiet tradition. As Noah accepted the cup, he held out the first spoonful toward the stranger without being asked. "You always get the first bite," he said. The stranger smiled with unmistakable affection before taking the smallest taste. Watching them together stirred memories Adrian had buried beneath years of work and regret. They did not seem like two people hiding from the world. They looked like a family protecting something precious. As they continued walking along the harbor, Noah suddenly paused beside a souvenir shop window. A small wooden sailboat displayed inside immediately caught his attention. "It looks just like the one in our living room," he said excitedly. Adrian looked at the stranger. "You live here?" The man answered calmly. "For now. Running forever cannot be easy." The stranger's eyes met Adrian's with quiet determination. "Surviving and running are not always the same thing." Before Adrian could respond, Noah gently slipped his hand into the stranger's. The simple gesture carried years of trust that no explanation could replace. At that exact moment, Adrian noticed a silver bracelet beneath Noah's jacket sleeve as the child reached toward the shop window. His breath caught instantly. Hanging from the bracelet was a tiny lighthouse charm carved from white shell. Adrian had bought that charm 8 years earlier from the gift shop beside this very pier. He had given it to Ethan on the afternoon they promised they would always find their way back to each other, no matter how far life carried them apart. There had only ever been one bracelet like it because the craftsman had made it by hand. Adrian stared at the familiar charm, unable to speak as impossible questions flooded his mind. Noah noticed his expression and innocently smiled. "Papa says this belonged to someone very important before it became mine." Adrian slowly lifted his eyes toward the stranger, whose calm silence seemed to confirm far more than any spoken answer ever could. Adrian could not take his eyes off the tiny lighthouse charm resting against Noah's wrist because every detail matched the gift he had once chosen with his own hands. The smooth white shell, the carefully carved windows, even the faint blue thread woven through the silver clasp were exactly as he remembered. There was no reasonable explanation for how the bracelet had found its way to the child standing only a few feet away. Noah noticed Adrian staring and gently touched the charm with a smile. "Papa says it reminds us that people who truly belong together always find the light again." The simple sentence echoed through Adrian's mind because those words had never been written anywhere. He had whispered them to Ethan alone on the old lighthouse observation deck during one quiet summer evening years before. The stranger watched Adrian's expression change but remained silent, allowing memory to accomplish what explanations never could. Finally, Adrian spoke with unusual honesty. "I said those words once." "Only once?" The stranger gave the smallest nod. "I know." Adrian's voice became almost a whisper. "How?" Before an answer could come, Noah tugged gently on the stranger's sleeve. Papa, the bookstore is closing. Adrian froze. He had heard the child use that word several times throughout the afternoon, yet only now did its meaning truly settle inside him. Papa. The warmth in Noah's voice carried complete trust, the kind that only grows through years of shared mornings, bedtime stories, birthday celebrations, and ordinary days lived together. Whoever this mysterious man really was, he had raised Noah with unwavering devotion. They began walking toward a quiet side street lined with small shops and historic brick buildings. Adrian followed several steps behind until the stranger stopped beside a modest white house overlooking the harbor. Flower boxes filled the windows, bicycles rested neatly beside the porch, and colorful drawings decorated one corner of the front door. It looked remarkably similar to the home Ethan had once described during their long walks together. A wide front porch. Peaceful streets. A place where children could laugh without fear. Adrian remembered dismissing that dream as something they would build someday after business finally slowed down. Someday had never arrived. Noah happily ran inside after waving goodbye, leaving Adrian and the stranger alone beneath the fading evening sky. For several moments neither of them spoke. Finally Adrian broke the silence. Everything about this place feels like Ethan. The stranger looked toward the glowing porch light. Dreams have a way of surviving, even when people believe they have disappeared. Adrian stepped closer. If you know him, tell me where he is. If he is alive, I deserve to hear the truth. The stranger met his eyes with quiet resolve. Deserving the truth and being ready for it are not always the same thing. At that exact moment, the peaceful silence was interrupted by the sound of several black vehicles turning onto the narrow street. They slowed as they approached the white house before stopping across the road. Adrian immediately recognized one of the drivers as a longtime member of Sterling family security. The stranger noticed them as well but showed no fear. Instead, he calmly slipped a folded document into Adrian's hand. Read this before anyone else does, he said. Tomorrow morning the Sterling board will hold an emergency meeting. They believe they are protecting their legacy. They do not realize they are about to meet its rightful future. As Adrian unfolded the first page beneath the porch light, his eyes landed on an official birth certificate, and the father's name printed clearly across the document made his entire world stand still. Adrian stared at the birth certificate as though the words might change if he blinked, but they remained exactly where they had been printed years earlier. Beneath Noah's name, the space identifying his father contained only two unmistakable words. Adrian Sterling. His fingers tightened around the document, while every conversation, every unanswered question, and every forgotten memory rushed back with overwhelming clarity. Before he could speak, the stranger quietly stepped back toward the porch. The truth has always existed, he said. The only difference is whether people are finally willing to see it. Across the street, the black vehicles remained parked without anyone stepping outside. Their presence was not meant to frighten. It was meant to watch. Adrian slowly raised his eyes. If Noah is my son, why was I never told? The stranger answered with calm restraint. Because someone understood that a hidden heir is easier to erase than a recognized one. Adrian lowered his gaze to the document once more. The official seal, hospital records, signatures, and registration numbers all appeared authentic. Nothing looked altered or incomplete. Who did this? He asked quietly. The stranger did not answer directly. Tomorrow morning, the Sterling board will try to protect its version of history. Ask them why the original hospital records disappeared. Ask them why witnesses suddenly changed their statements. Ask them who benefited from convincing you that Ethan had abandoned everything. Adrian felt a weight settle over him unlike anything he had carried as a business leader. For 7 years he had believed he was mourning someone he had lost. Now he faced the possibility that he had been mourning a lie while another life had quietly continued without him. The front door opened before either man could continue. Noah stepped onto the porch holding a small wooden sailboat with careful hands. Papa, he called warmly. I fixed the little flag. The stranger smiled with unmistakable pride before walking toward him. Noah noticed Adrian still standing near the gate and hurried over with innocent excitement. "Do you want to see?" he asked. Adrian nodded silently. Noah proudly handed him the tiny sailboat. Carefully written across the white sail in neat blue letters were the words "Find your way home." Adrian felt his throat tighten because Ethan had once written those exact words on a paper boat they floated together into the harbor during one quiet summer evening. Noah looked up with complete sincerity. "Papa says every family gets lost sometimes. That does not mean they cannot find each other again." Adrian slowly returned the boat, unable to find an immediate reply. The stranger rested one reassuring hand on Noah's shoulder before looking back at Adrian. "Tomorrow will not decide who Noah is," he said. "It will decide whether the Sterling family deserves to know him." At sunrise the next morning, every member of the Sterling board gathered inside the executive conference room at Sterling Tower for an emergency session called without public notice. Thick folders waited at every seat, yet no one touched them. The atmosphere remained tense as whispered conversations stopped the moment Adrian entered carrying a single envelope and one official birth certificate. The elderly advisor who had fled the memorial days earlier immediately recognized the document and quietly closed his eyes. Adrian placed the papers in the center of the polished conference table and spoke with a calm confidence that silenced the entire room. "Before we discuss the future of this company," he said, "we are finally going to discuss the truth about the past." The conference room remained completely silent after Adrian's words settled over the polished table. No one reached for the folders. No one interrupted. The birth certificate resting in the center of the room carried more weight than every financial report surrounding it. Adrian slowly looked around at the directors who had guided the Sterling family for decades. 7 years ago, someone convinced me that I had lost the person I trusted most, he said. Yesterday I learned that the truth was never lost. It was hidden. The elderly advisor lowered his head before quietly standing from his chair. His voice trembled with regret rather than fear. "It began as an attempt to protect the company," he admitted. "Several influential investors believed your relationship with Ethan would threaten the future of Sterling Industries. They demanded distance. When misunderstandings appeared, some people chose not to correct them. Then every silence created another lie." Adrian listened without speaking. The explanation did not erase the years that had been stolen, but it finally revealed how trust had been replaced by carefully arranged deception instead of honest conversation. One by one, additional documents were placed on the table. Archived correspondence, restored hospital records, and legal statements confirmed that Noah had always been recognized through official records even though those files had quietly disappeared from the company's internal archives. The board members who had remained silent for years could no longer deny what stood before them. Later that afternoon, Adrian drove back to Gray Harbor carrying nothing except the envelope, the restored records, and a quiet determination to stop chasing the past and begin repairing the future. The small white house overlooking the harbor looked exactly as it had the evening before. Noah was sitting on the front porch carefully painting another tiny wooden sailboat while the mysterious stranger watered flowers beside the steps. Adrian approached slowly until Noah noticed him first. The boy smiled brightly and waved. "You came back." Adrian smiled for the first time in years without forcing himself to do so. "I said I would." The stranger looked at Adrian with calm eyes, waiting for whatever words would come next. Adrian stopped a few feet away before speaking with complete honesty. "I cannot change the years that are gone. I cannot ask for them back. But I can choose what I do with every day that comes after this." 1. For several quiet seconds, no one moved. Then the stranger reached up and removed the thin glasses he had worn since appearing at the memorial. Without them, the final distance between memory and reality disappeared. Adrian saw the familiar eyes, the gentle smile, and the quiet strength he had searched for across 7 empty years. Ethan Brooks stood before him exactly as he had always been, changed by time but never by character. Adrian felt tears gather before he could stop them. "Ethan," he whispered. Ethan stepped forward with peaceful certainty. "I never came back to destroy your life. he said softly. I came back because Noah deserved the truth, and because every child deserves to know where he belongs. Noah looked from one man to the other before innocently slipping his hands into both of theirs. Does this mean we can all watch the sailboats together now? Ethan smiled warmly. Adrian nodded through grateful tears. Yes, he answered. If you will let me learn how to be part of your family. Weeks later, beneath the same lighthouse where broken promises had once divided them, the Sterling family publicly recognized Noah as Adrian's lawful son and the youngest heir to the Sterling legacy. Reporters expected scandal, investors expected conflict, but instead they witnessed something far more powerful. They watched three people choose honesty over pride and forgiveness over fear. As the evening sun settled across Gray Harbor, Noah placed one final paper sailboat onto the calm water. The tiny boat drifted toward the horizon while Ethan and Adrian stood beside him, no longer separated by secrets but united by the simple truth that the brightest future begins the moment people finally stop hiding from the past.